I've heard a lot of things say that childhood sweethearts don't fall from the sky, and I don't believe it, until I stumbled upon a book in which the main character was my bamboo horse, and I was just cannon fodder. I'm a character in a book. What are you kidding? As the plots in the book were released one by one, I panicked. Gerald Bruno and I met when we were still wearing open crotch pants, and it's been 18 years now. My mom and his mom are best friends. When Gerald Bruno's mother conceived him on the front foot, my mother followed on the back foot, and the two decided at that time. They both gave birth to sons, that is, brothers who love each other. If it is a daughter, it is a close best friend. If it is a man and a woman, then it is a baby kiss. 2 months apart from the birth, it happened to be a man and a woman. The two mothers felt that it was fate, so they decided to set a baby kiss for the two of us with a wave of their hands, and even the names of me and Gerald Bruno were chosen according to the couple's name. As for the opinion of the two fathers, what is it? Does it matter? It doesn't matter at all. Gerald Bruno and I have been doing exactly what they wanted. We have had a good relationship since we were young. Kindergarten, elementary school, junior high school are all in the same school, and even university is in the same school. The relationship between the two of us is the envy of those around us, and even I myself always sigh that I am really a reincarnation expert, until one day, I accidentally found a book called Gerald Bruno Ruth Juliet, in which the main character is called Gerald Bruno. The female protagonist is called Ruth Juliet, and my bamboo horse's name is Gerald Bruno. Ruth Juliet is the school flower of our school. After reading the whole book, my whole person was like being doused with a bucket of cold water. A book doesn't make me so disproportionate, and the main story in it is like it really happened, which makes me completely panic. It is written in the book that Gerald Bruno and I were childhood sweethearts, but he didn't like me. Gerald Bruno fell in love with Ruth Juliet at first sight, and Gerald Bruno tried not to let Ruth Juliet misunderstood him and distanced herself from me. And I had a deep affection for Gerald Bruno, and I stalked him, which annoyed him, and eventually the two broke up, and they didn't even have to be friends. The more I looked at it, the more angry I became, and tears fell uncontrollably, blurring the words Gerald Bruno in the book, and my heart throbbed when I read it. What makes me fall in love with Gerald Bruno? Well, I do have a deep affection for Gerald Bruno. However, I don't stalk Gerald Bruno, who is clearly stalking me. Fuck your uncle's Gerald Bruno. I'll ignore him anymore. Gerald Bruno took care of me from childhood to adulthood, and I don't seem to be able to do anything without him. I get even angrier when I think about it, but the thought of him not being where he belonged made my heart throb. I touched my tears, picked up my phone and quickly booked a ticket for the latest trip. Gerald Bruno and I have just entered the first year of college, and we are close to the National Day holiday, and we have been delayed for 2 days because of Gerald Bruno's trouble, and now I don't want to go back with him, and I am sad to see him. Gerald Bruno has been very busy these days, and although I don't know what he's up to, I went home alone when he didn't have time to pay attention to me. As soon as I arrived at the door with my suitcase, I saw my mom and said, "Why didn't Gerald Bruno come?" "Coming home, me, dear mother, I'm your daughter. I just came back and I didn't see you to greet your daughter." Gerald Bruno, I know Gerald Bruno, and he is your own child, I thought angrily, and walked away with a small face, leaving a sentence, "I don't know." I went back to my room, put my suitcase down, and buried my whole body in the quilt, feeling sad. "What's the matter?" "I'm having trouble with Gerald Bruno." My mom walked in and said. I subconsciously retorted, "No, okay, I don't know about you yet." My mom debunked it directly. "How often did Gerald Bruno not send you home first, and then go home on his own? How many times did you carry your suitcase?" A needle hit the nail on the head. "Tell me, what's wrong with you?" Faced with my mother's questioning, I was covered in the quilt and didn't know what to say. Do you want me to say that we are characters in a book? Gerald Bruno doesn't like me, has his own real daughter, and I am just a little cannon fodder among them. If I were to say that, my mom would have to pry my brain open and see. I hummed under the covers. My mother didn't plan to care, just symbolically condolences to her daughter. And Hazel Terry of the province always said that she couldn't feel mother's love. I felt even more sad when I heard the door closing, and then just fell asleep. I slept all afternoon, and no one came to call me. It's too much. I'm angry, the kind that can't be coaxed. When the door opened, I thought my dad had come to call me for dinner, and I muffled, "I'm not hungry, I'm not going to eat." After saying that, my stomach betrayed me and screamed. I covered myself in the quilt and didn't speak, pretending that the person who had just been humiliated was not me. A chuckle rang out in the room. I froze. It was Gerald Bruno. How did you get back? What's wrong? Isn't it that I've been too busy to ignore you lately? Don't be angry. Okay, I was wrong. Gerald Bruno walked over and pulled me out of the covers and whispered. My unassuming face turned red, and every time I got angry, Gerald Bruno whispered to me, and I ate him the most. But not this time. I'm going to be tough. I broke away from him, ignoring him. I'm still angry. Tilda. Gerald Bruno coaxed me and said, "Didn't you regret that you didn't go to the new amusement park in the west of the city last year? And we'll go tomorrow." Okay. Although I was very excited, I couldn't compromise, so I pouted. The National Day holiday. There are many people and it is crowded and hot, so I won't go. Gerald Bruno said, "I'll line up. You just stand in the shade." I still ignore him. Every time I go out to play, it's not you who line up. This trick is useless to me. Gerald Bruno unleashed his killer feature, fried chicken ice cream. My eyes lit up, and I was so sad that I was fed to a dog, and I shouted excitedly, "Okay, I'm going to have 3 flavors of ice cream, so I can eat 3 ice creams. Ha ha ha, I'm really smart, no problem." After saying that, I regretted it and was tempted again. It's insidious. Since my stomach is too fragile, I can't eat too much of this junk food, otherwise it will hurt my stomach. I'm hungry for these again. No. Gerald Bruno immediately took the bait as soon as he let go, and I can't be blamed for that. It's just that I'm holding back too hard. I comforted myself like this. Hey, what are you doing? I struggled to get up, but Gerald Bruno couldn't move. Can you tell me why you're angry? Gerald Bruno's deep eyes looked straight at me. If I hadn't said it, Gerald Bruno would have been able to stalemate with me for one night. Gerald Bruno saw that I didn't answer him for a long time, and rubbed my neck, quite helpless. He whispered softly in my ear, exhaling and tickling in my ear. My body went limp, and I hurriedly took what he had just said to prevaricate him. "You're so busy, you don't pay much attention to me." The more he talked, the more aggrieved he became, and finally he was faintly crying. "What is there to cry about? I will take time to accompany you in the future." Obediently Tilda stopped crying. Gerald Bruno helped me wipe away my tears and coaxed me softly. I cried even harder. I can't stand the thought that Gerald Bruno will like someone else, and I can't stand that Gerald Bruno will leave me. Gerald Bruno coaxed me for a while before getting me out, and I came out with red eyes. At a glance, I saw my parents sitting on the sofa watching TV, so unhappy. I immediately glared at them angrily. As soon as the two of them saw me, they immediately put away the smiles on their faces, and pretended to be concerned and said, "Come out, I'm bothering you again, Gerald Bruno." Gerald Bruno smiled and said he was okay and went to the kitchen. My mother's face immediately changed, and the gentleness just now seemed to be an illusion. "What are you making trouble again?" Gerald Bruno called me at noon, and rushed back in the evening, and I didn't have time to return home. "Why?" my mom pointed. "The suitcase is right at our door." I looked over and there was a black suitcase in the hallway. That's when I realized that Gerald Bruno had just looked haggard, and his eyes were blue. It seems that Gerald Bruno is really busy, and I feel a little guilty when I think about what I just said. Hazel Terry, you're not too young to be as petty as you were when you were a kid. You know. Gerald Bruno came out of the kitchen with the food and said, Auntie, is none of Hazel Terry's business. This time it's my fault. I'm making Hazel Terry angry. Oh, what a big deal. Haven't you ever had fewer fights since you were a child? After saying that, my mother's face suddenly froze, as if Gerald Bruno had been coaxing her daughter since she was a child. My mom coughed uncomfortably. Okay, let's eat. It's okay. Gerald Bruno and I sat at the table and ate, and Gerald Bruno served me the food, and we were silent for a moment. I don't know when it began. Whenever I was in a bad mood or had a temper, my parents could just ignore me, and didn't care about me at all. Well, every time I get into a mess, it's because of Gerald Bruno. Because Gerald Bruno doesn't have to wait long for me to make a fuss and come and coax me, and over time everyone gets used to it. But have they ever wondered what to do if Gerald Bruno doesn't want me one day? I didn't believe that there would be such a day, but now I can't believe that I am so confident. The next morning I went to the playground with Gerald Bruno, and it was just as I expected. Packed. Gerald Bruno was in line, and I was standing in the shade not far away. The young man's tall figure stood out in the long line, and looking at him made me shake for a moment. I looked at it again, blinked and looked again, and there were two strange girls standing next to Gerald Bruno, and he was still smiling so softly. My heart soured. I could vaguely see Gerald Bruno talking to them, and then the two girls looked in my direction, and I couldn't figure it out. Not to be outdone, I looked back. What to see? I haven't seen a beautiful woman, I thought to myself. I watched as the two girls turned their heads, and said something to Gerald Bruno, and then left. The young man's smooth and fair face is full of angular coldness, dark and deep eyes, and a high nose bridge. I snorted coldly. A blue face and a face that messed with flowers. After I played a few projects with Gerald Bruno, I pulled him to buy ice cream, and God knows how long it had been since I had ice cream. I looked at the two-color ice cream in my hand, and fell into deep thought. I looked up and saw Gerald Bruno smiling and saying, Don't you want to eat 3 flavors of ice cream? You can taste this one in my hand, and I'll help you with the rest. I stared at him with wide eyes in disbelief. How could I say such shameless words? Gerald Bruno smiled and said, Okay, eat it. If you don't eat it, it will melt. As treacherous as ever. It makes my teeth itch with anger. HMPH tilde. I took a big bite. I looked at the ice cream in Gerald Bruno's hand and barely touched it, thinking I hadn't tasted it yet. I rubbed it over, and took a big bite out of Gerald Bruno's eyes. The sweet strawberry flavor spreads to the taste buds, and the aftertaste disappears before it has time to linger. I haven't tasted enough yet. I'll take another bite. As I spoke, I grabbed Gerald Bruno's hand, and bit down on the ice cream. As long as I don't let go, this ice cream is mine. Suddenly my tongue touched something hot and I licked it. I jerked my head up, and met a pair of smiling eyes, and my whole face flushed. Gerald Bruno's laughter came from his head. Don't taste it. This villain. I was holding the ice cream in my hand with my head down, trying to ignore the touch just now. The more I do this, the clearer it becomes in my mind. The mouth is full of just strawberry flavor and soft touch. The National Day holiday passed in the blink of an eye, and this time back to school. I was with Gerald Bruno. He dropped me off at the dorm, and moved my suitcase into my dorm before leaving. Gerald Bruno was still very busy when he returned to school, but he would find time to eat with me from time to time, which really made me feel a lot more at ease. Until one day, my roommate and I were about to go to the school for a good meal, when we were walking on the road when we heard the boss say, Hey, Sixth, isn't that your bamboo horse? Why are you with Ruth Juliet? I followed her gaze, and Gerald Bruno and Ruth Juliet walked side by side. as if they were talking something. I stared at the smile on Gerald Bruno's face, and the soft brow pierced me. The two walked into a recently opened bubble tea shop. I looked up at the name of the store. The prices of this shop are extremely expensive. Gerald Bruno is really generous. I bit my lip and tried not to cry. Hazel Terry, be angry. This is out there. Don't be ashamed. This liar. I don't like him anymore. The fourth child couldn't stand it anymore, so he hugged me. What a big deal. Isn't it just a man? Find a better one next. Well, find a better one next. I wiped my tears and barely smiled. For the next few days, Gerald Bruno asked me out for dinner and I pushed it off. But Gerald Bruno really didn't come back to me. Dead Gerald Bruno. Go with your heroine. Lord Ben won't be with you. I lay on my desk in the library, so tired that I couldn't read a word, and Gerald Bruno wasn't there, so I didn't have the desire to read. Damn it. No, Hazel Terry, it can't be like this. I rubbed my eyelids on my hands, and reluctantly glanced at the words on the book. Heh. A chuckle sounded above me, and I sat up. When I looked up, I was met by a pair of narrow smiling eyes, and I was stunned. And then I heard him say, "Classmate, do you have someone here?" I looked across from me, and a book was lying alone, but there was no owner to read it. Every time I came to the library, I subconsciously occupied a seat for Gerald Bruno, although he didn't come to the library with me once when I came back for the National Day, but I still subconsciously occupied it for him. I silently took back the book across from me and said, "You can sit on no one." The other party said gently, "Thank you, classmate." After meeting more often in the library and getting acquainted, we exchanged names, and it turned out that the other party was Chris Bruno, a sophomore in computer science. "Senpai," a gentle voice came from behind him. I turned my head to see Chris Bruno behind me, and I smiled and replied, "Senior, what a coincidence. Are you here to eat tomato stewed brisket too? The whole school is the most authentic tomato brisket in this window." "That's right. I came here today on purpose. I didn't expect it to be such a coincidence." Chris Bruno smiled faintly. My roommate grabbed me, leaned in close to me and whispered, "What's the matter, Sixth? This is Chris Bruno, the god of computer science. With you? Admire. Take advantage of the opportunity. Take care of you." In the face of my roommate's jokes, I was a little helpless. After dinner, I sat with Chris Bruno and his friends, the fourth child and Chris Bruno's friend. The two social cows kicked this strange atmosphere away. "Fourth, senior, my computer is newly bought, and it hasn't been used for a long time. Can you help me take a look?" "Yes, I wonder, isn't it the third child, who recently bought a new computer?" I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, the fourth child directly blocked my mouth with a brisket. The fourth child knocked me back with a look, and I silently chewed the innermost beef brisket, not to mention that it was quite delicious. "Come on, let's add a weshet." The fourth child immediately turned on the mobile phone, and the screen lit up with the QR code that had been prepared. Awesome. Willing to bow down, I turned my head and ate silently. After a few days, Gerald Bruno called me and said it was downstairs in my dormitory. I looked at the time. It was almost 10 o'clock. I said it was too late and I was going to sleep. Gerald Bruno said that if I didn't come down, he would stand downstairs all night until I came down. I knew his temper so well that I was afraid that he would stand all night, so I had to go down. I walked out of the dorm in slippers and I saw him at a glance. Gerald Bruno stood under the street lamp and lowered his eyes, looking particularly good in the light of the street lamp. He's so dazzling. I've always known it. I've been chasing him secretly, but I can't seem to catch up. Along the way, many girls stopped to look at him, and many bold girls came forward to talk to him, but he drove them away with a cold face. Looking at his face, even after decades of looking at it, it still makes me shake. I paused for a moment before I walked over. As I got closer, I saw that he had thick dark circles under his eyes and slightly sunken cheeks. He lost weight. I whispered, Gerald Bruno. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, and I was stunned. Gerald Bruno grabbed me and whispered to me, Hazel Terry. The young man's voice was hoarse, as if he had a great grievance. Why don't you ignore me? I bit my lower lip, suppressed my heartache and said, I didn't. As soon as he finished speaking, a wetness came from his neck. Hazel Terry, you know that, when I heard them say that you often go to the library with Chris Bruno and eat together, I am crazy with jealousy. I didn't, I whispered. I didn't go to the library with Chris Bruno. I just happened to bump into each other and didn't eat together. I was with my roommate that time, just sharing a table. Gerald Bruno said arrogantly. Then you are not allowed to let him sit across from you. It is my exclusive place. I whispered back, okay. After coaxing Gerald Bruno away, I crouched weakly on the ground. Gerald Bruno, you're so good, but you're still going to leave me. Seeing him so tired, I couldn't say anything if I refused. Next time, he's so tired. Then I'll be selfish to have you for a while longer. And that's it. I'm not greedy. Don't treat me like a stranger. Gerald Bruno, people have gone away, and no one has answered my questions. There was a knock at the door. Who's early in the morning? Sixth. Go open the door. The boss issued orders under the quilt. Okay Tilda. I got out of bed with my eyes half squinted, and froze as soon as I opened the door. It's Ruth Juliet. What's she here for? I asked. Hello. What's the matter? Ruth Juliet raised the milk tea in his hand and said, Gerald Bruno took me to this new bubble tea shop to drink milk tea. I think this taste is very delicious. Gerald Bruno asked me to bring you a cup by the way. By the way, bring me a drink. Also, Gerald Bruno only started to get along with Ruth Juliet after he first got to know him. Ruth Juliet handed me the milk tea, and she said, Gerald Bruno couldn't come to the girls' dormitory, so he asked me to do it for me. I reached out and took it and said, thank you. You're welcome. Yes. Ruth Juliet pointed to the 5 cups on the ground and said, these were also bought by Gerald Bruno. I looked at the 5 cups of milk tea on the ground and pondered, Gerald Bruno, what does this mean? Classmates. I came back to my senses, looked at her and said, what's wrong? She smiled slightly and asked generously, Hazel Terry, you and Gerald Bruno are childhood sweethearts. You should know Gerald Bruno's preferences. I was stunned, looking at her with a little shyness on her face, and the love in her eyes that could not be hidden. I like Gerald Bruno. I want to chase him. Ruth Juliet was stunned when she saw me, and explained with a smile, Gerald Bruno, he's single now. If I don't do it, he'll be snatched away by someone else. After all, someone as good as him is. But he is a gunman. You grew up with him. Do you know that he has someone he likes? I wanted to say he did, but the words that came out was, he doesn't have anyone he likes. Ruth Juliet seemed relieved. A bright smile appeared on her face, and she said in a brisk tone, Hazel Terry, can you tell me Gerald Bruno's preferences? I nodded hard and said, okay. When I was done, I realized that I knew so little about what Gerald Bruno liked and didn't like. I looked at her apologetically, and Ruth Juliet smiled and said, it's okay, but thank you. I have a lot of time with Gerald Bruno anyway, and the future will be long. After saying that, she looked at her watch, and her face showed a hint of anxiety. I still have to go to Gerald Bruno's company, so I'll leave first, and I'll trouble you to bring in these 5 cups of milk tea on the ground. After saying that, he hurried away. I looked at her back and froze in place. Gerald Bruno's company. Oh yes, I remembered. After the college entrance examination, Gerald Bruno said that he would start a business in college, but he didn't expect to start a business in his freshman year. No wonder it's so busy. Unexpectedly, Ruth Juliet was also in Gerald Bruno's company, So it's no wonder she said that she spent a lot of time with Gerald Bruno. Isn't it a lot of time to be together in one company? I went in with the milk tea, and the boss poked his head out and asked, "Who?" "Ruth Juliet." I put the milk tea on their table one by one. "Come and deliver the milk tea. I'll put it on the table for you." "Who drinks milk tea in the morning?" "It seems to be from the X family." "What?" The boss jumped up from the bed and took a 180-degree turn. "Hey, it's worthy of being a school flower. A beautiful person with a good heart. A beautiful and excellent person like her. This school flower is simply deserved." The boss paused. "This milk tea is so expensive. Why did Ruth Juliet buy it for us to drink?" The boss was puzzled and began to conspiracy theories. "Why did she give us milk tea? Recently, the schoolgirl has started to be selected, so she won't use this to buy us." "Right." She propped her head and said, "For the sake of milk tea, we must give her this ticket in the dormitory." "You're thinking too much." I sat down in my chair and said lightly, "Gerald Bruno bought it. These 6 cups add up to almost 300. You're a bamboo." The boss lay back down. "It's been a long time. It turned out to be an errand runner." I stared at the cup of milk tea, and I remembered what Ruth Juliet said. "I think this is delicious. So Gerald Bruno asked me to bring you a cup too." My mother was born prematurely when she gave birth to me, and I was weak since I was a child, and I could hardly touch milk tea fried chicken. Obviously, as long as I secretly drank a cup of milk tea, Gerald Bruno would talk to me for a long time with a stinky face. Sure enough, don't you care? Hazel Terry. I came back to my senses and looked at the boss staring at me, and I looked at her with a confused look on her face. "What's wrong? I've called you several times. What are you doing?" "I'm sorry." "What's wrong?" The boss waved his hand and said, "It's okay. I just want to ask you if you and Gerald Bruno are together. Otherwise, how would Gerald Bruno send milk tea to our entire dormitory, and also to the X family?" My eyes darkened. I shook my head and said, "No." "Oh, I'll just ask." "It's okay." The boss held out a hand and pointed at me and said, "Don't quarrel with me, or I'll get you." "Thank you." My heart says, "Gerald Bruno, we're not kids anymore. It's time to keep our distance. But you're always taking your steps too, and making me always fantasize that you like me too." I picked up the book and reread it, and it also had Ruth Juliet delivering milk tea to our dorm room, and I looked at the conversation almost as if it had just happened. Ruth Juliet is one of the partners of Gerald Bruno. Well, in reality, it's the same. It's all right. Gerald Bruno will start to distance himself from me, too. Just because Ruth Juliet said, "You are too close to me," and she is jealous. There was a vibration on my phone. I opened Weshit, and Gerald Bruno sent me a message asking me, "Gerald Bruno of Hazel Terry, did you receive the milk tea? Is it delicious?" Me, I got it. It tasted good. "Gerald Bruno of Hazel Terry, you told me that your roommates take good care of you on weekdays, so I bought them too. As a thank you for taking care of you." I couldn't help but clench my fingers on my phone. "Gerald Bruno, you always do such misleading things. Even they mistakenly think you like me." Thinking of that book, Gerald Bruno said that he was just my sister, and that he was sorry if I misunderstood. I bit my lip and typed back, "Me, thank you." I quickly muted my phone and put it upside down on the table, no longer looking at Gerald Bruno's messages. I wanted to ask Gerald Bruno if he liked me, but everything was going the way it was written. I retreated, scared, afraid of humiliating myself, and got a quote from Gerald Bruno. "I'm just a sister to you, and I'm sorry if I misunderstood you." At noon, I was about to go to the cafeteria with my roommates to eat when I was blocked by Gerald Bruno in the classroom. The 5 roommates took a bribe from Gerald Bruno this morning, and they ignored my plea for help and gave me an ambiguous look in their eyes, and then just left. No righteousness. Excessively. At this point, the classroom was gone, and I nudged him. What are you doing? His lips tightened, his eyes sank, and his voice was a little hoarse. Hazel Terry, what the hell is wrong with you? You weren't like this before. How's that going? My heart said. He said, don't you like it? I interrupted him and calmly said, no, I don't like him. He breathed a sigh of relief and hugged me tightly. Don't be so angry with me, and don't say thank you to me, okay? I buried myself in his arms, and my heart was filled with bitterness. Gerald Bruno, what are we like this? Nothing. Gerald Bruno, what do you think of me? Since you think of me as a sister, don't always do such misleading things. I got a little angry, pushed him away, and said lightly, I'm hungry. Okay, I'll take you to dinner. Gerald Bruno took me to a restaurant near the school, where he said that his company had just completed a small project and was going to celebrate, and asked me if I would mind being with them. I shook my head. As long as I wasn't alone with him, I wouldn't mind. He pushed the box open, and I looked at Ruth Juliet. Gerald Bruno really has you. Leave us behind, and run. They were silent when they saw me walk in. Soon, someone reacted and joked. It turned out that I picked up a beautiful woman. I can be forgiven, ha ha ha. No matter how sluggish I was, I could hear a hint of embarrassment. Soon the atmosphere came alive. Gerald Bruno and I were not professionals, and they were saying things I didn't understand. Gerald Bruno knew I didn't understand, so he whispered to me from time to time that he was always thoughtful and thoughtful. But I was sick at the thought that such a good Gerald Bruno would not belong to me. I can't bear it. I listened absent-mindedly and replied to him perfunctorily. I drank a little too much water and said, I'll go to the bathroom. Gerald Bruno grabbed my hand. I'll go with you. I pushed his hand away. I'm not a kid anymore. With that, I got up and walked out. Before the door was closed, I heard someone say, Gerald Bruno, is that girl your girlfriend? I closed the door for a moment, expecting a faint expectation, and then I heard him say, no. Bang, the door is closed. It hurts so much to hear Gerald Bruno say that we don't have anything to do with each other. Gerald Bruno, if you don't like me, then don't give me hope. Back in the box, looking at their inquiring eyes, I felt uncomfortable, like I was a clown. Looked at Ruth Juliet on the side, talking with everyone generously. Two equally excellent people, really matched. I couldn't stay any longer, so I made an excuse to leave. Gerald Bruno came out with me. I said, I have a class in the afternoon. You don't have to follow me. It's a celebration banquet. How can you be embarrassed to go? Gerald Bruno was not at ease. I shook his arm and coquettishly said, okay, you go back quickly. Can I still get lost when I'm so old? Knowing that Gerald Bruno couldn't resist being coquettish to me, he was persuaded by me to go back. When I was young, we were all together when I came home from school, and you always asked me to hold you firmly, for fear that I would get lost. But when I grow up, Gerald Bruno, I'm about to lose you. What should I do? It's just autumn. Why is the weather in the north so cold? When I returned to the dormitory, I looked at the cup of milk tea on the table, and for the first time, the milk tea was no longer attractive to me. Ever since I was separated from Gerald Bruno, I had started to avoid him, consciously or unconsciously. Baby Tilda, can you let me go? The fourth child was stubbornly pulling the ladder, his face full of stubbornness. You promise me. I repented. I glanced at her, hooked the corners of my mouth and said, you drank my milk tea. Someone, who was still full of momentum just now, suddenly froze and wilted. Look at my mouth. I've obviously drunk a cup. Why can't I help it? Ah, Tilda, sure enough, the world won't drop pies in vain. Looking at her resentful eyes, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Okay, let's go. Basically, every time I go to the library, I run into Christ Bruno once or twice. Christ Bruno is gentle and polite, and there is always an empty seat across from me, and I can't pull my face down and refuse. I don't want to get along with him, so I can only pull the fourth child. I don't know if it's my delusion, but since I pulled the fourth child, I can almost run into Christ Bruno back. I watched as Christ Bruno skillfully took out the snack and handed it to the fourth, who calmly took it. It's hard for Christ Bruno to break the bank. Who made the fourth lady be able to make it? Only food can stop her. When Christ Bruno learned about this method, every time we met Christ Bruno, he would bring out a bunch of snacks, and I really don't know where he got so much to eat. The fourth said that he was thirsty, and Christ Bruno immediately handed over water. The fourth child's hands were dirty, and Christ Bruno silently handed over a pack of wet wipes. Watching them interact so naturally, what's wrong with suddenly feeling a little redundant? As we sat in the corner, Christ Bruno and I whispered about the topic when the fourth child, who was eating a snack, suddenly said, "Hazel Terry, you'll be on your birthday in a few days. How are you going to spend it? You're 18 years old after all." I froze, looking at the eyes of the two of them. I didn't know what to say. My mom called yesterday and asked Gerald Bruno to take me out to have fun and make up for a coming-of-age ceremony when I get back from winter break. I didn't tell my family what happened to me and Gerald Bruno, and even a few of my roommates only knew that Gerald Bruno and I were childhood sweethearts. What kind of childhood sweethearts are related? They don't know. I bit my lip. Isn't there just no birthday for Gerald Bruno? Am I not enough? I smiled and said, "I'm going to book a private room at XX, and everyone will have to look at it then." Whoa! The fourth child immediately stopped his voice and whispered, "Sixth brother, don't worry, we promise to make it lively for you." Looking at Christ Bruno on the sidelines, I had no choice but to invite him. Christ Bruno readily agreed. I originally just wanted 6 roommates to have a good time. This dead fourth. On the way back, I grabbed the soft flesh on her waist fiercely. "Hatilda," the fourth grinned and said bitterly. "Sixth, eat people with soft mouths and short hands." She didn't want to. Who asked Christ Bruno to buy her snacks expensive? He hinted at it, and she was too embarrassed to refuse. I glared at her. "Who made you gluttonous?" The fourth child said faintly. "Who made me a foodie, and just let Christ Bruno know, and he bought all the flavors I like. Who is to blame? Only Christ Bruno is too thief." I choked, and I couldn't refute it. On my birthday, Gerald Bruno messaged me since the morning asking if I was available for the past 2 days, and I kept making excuses that I wasn't. In the evening, I turned off my phone and brought my roommate, Christ Bruno, and Christ Bruno's friend, who hooked up with the fourth child, and now the boyfriend of the third child, to the box I booked. I told the staff here before, and there is a birthday in this box today. When the door was opened, everyone was amazed. "It's so good looking." The third sighed. "Tomorrow is another day to retouch and fix me." The third boyfriend said, "I'll help you." The third child said, "Okay." The boss said quietly, "Sprinkle dog food. Please go out and turn left." It's so romantic, especially suitable for confession. The fourth lady owes such a sentence, and it was a hard kick to greet her. Halfway through the game, Christ Bruno picked up the microphone and said, "Quiet down, everybody. I have something to say." The crowd fell silent and looked at him. After saying the meaty words, everyone shouted that they couldn't stand it. Christ Bruno looked at the girl he liked with gentle eyes and said, "Would you like to be my girlfriend?" Bang! The door to the box was violently pushed open, and Gerald Bruno walked in, his voice cold. "She doesn't want to. I do." 2 voices collided together. The two looked at each other, and Gerald Bruno's frosty face cracked for a moment. Gerald Bruno had always been calm, and it was rare to see him with such an amusing expression, and I burst out laughing. When Christ Bruno confessed, I vaguely knew something, but I wasn't sure. I was still nervous, and I was relieved until he said he liked the fourth child. After all, it's my birthday, and I don't want to embarrass them. In the midst of the ill-intentioned gaze of the crowd, I was taken away by Gerald Bruno. Before leaving, The fourth child came to the sentence. We are 6 adults. Adults should do what adults should do. Facing my eyes of death, the fourth child smiled so unhappily. Gerald Bruno led me to the hotel, and as soon as I entered, my whole face sank. He said, "Hazel Terry." I subconsciously stood up obediently, and waited to listen to the training. Growing up, whenever Gerald Bruno called me by name, I knew I was going to suffer. Gerald Bruno's eyes were heavy, and he said word by word, "Hazel Terry, since the National Day holiday, I feel that you are avoiding me." "Why? Why are you avoiding me?" I whispered. "I didn't know." He approached me and counted the accounts one by one. "Go to the library to avoid me completely. Even if I want to eat with you, you are pushing. There are always various reasons to say that you are busy and have no time. Hazel Terry, you're alienating me." Gerald Bruno looked at me with lowered eyes. "I'm waiting for your explanation." The anger I was holding in my heart these days suddenly exploded, and I couldn't help but yell, "You were the one who alienated me first. Don't you have someone you like? Why do you always do things that make people misunderstood? Don't you know that I've always liked you? But I heard you say that day, I'm not your girlfriend." Gerald Bruno looked straight at me and said, "Yes, I don't want you to be my girlfriend. I just want you to be my wife." I couldn't help it. Tears fell from my eyes, and I sobbed. "Liar, you know how to lie to me." His voice softened. "Hazel Terry, I never lied to you." I whispered, "Did you deliberately coax me because of my birthday?" Gerald Bruno was furious, and looked at me dangerously. "Hazel Terry, I have relied on you in everything since I was a child. As long as you like it, I will do my best to give it to you. Am I not obvious enough?" He leaned close to my ear and whispered, "You know, since junior high school, I have collected all the boys who have thoughts about you, or try to send you love letters, so that they don't dare to think about you. If Chris Bruno confessed to you today, I would have beaten him up." Gerald Bruno's tone was scathing. I had never seen such a Gerald Bruno, which made me a little scared, and I sat on the bed with my legs limp, and Gerald Bruno pressed against me. I looked at him stunned and said, "Hazel Terry, listen, you've always liked you alone, and I've only liked you." He came down, touched my lips lightly, and whispered, "Hazel Terry, be nice. You are mine, and no one can snatch you away from me." But it took me a long time to hold back a sentence. Childhood sweethearts are invincible to the sky, and this is how they are written in novels. What doesn't fall from the sky? I just know that I like you. What if? No, in case. Gerald Bruno forced his chattering mouth and bit hard. I looked at him with a flushed face. My hands pressed against his chest, and my voice trembled a little. What are you going to do?" he said in a hoarse voice. "Of course it's to do something that grown-ups should do." After saying that, he sealed my lips. I tugged at his shirt and closed my eyes, and I responded to him jerkily, "Well, I believe you. Everything is out of control." The next day, under the pressure of Gerald Bruno, I pulled out of the previous series of anomalies. Gerald Bruno looked at me with a dark face. "So, you're alienating me because of what was written in that broken book. Hazel Terry, do you have any brains?" I whispered. "But everything in that book actually happened." Gerald Bruno's face darkened. "Hazel Terry is not too bold to hide something from me." I silently retracted my head into the quilt and said aggrievedly, "You murder me, Hazel Terry. Not only did you kill me, you scared me." Gerald Bruno took a deep breath, dragged the man out, and went straight to clean up. The next night I was escorted back to my dorm room by Gerald Bruno, and when I entered, 5 pairs of eyes looked at me in unison. I swallowed my saliva and quietly moved to the side, and the boss scolded me, frightening me to freeze in place, be lenient in confession, and strict in resisting. The gaze that looked at me gradually became obscene. "Say, what has happened in the past 2 days, Tilda?" The fourth man had sharp eyes, saw a strawberry mark on my neck, and directly said, It's fun to play. I covered my ears and covered my hands like a bell, and I was so ashamed that Gerald Bruno was to blame. There was a knock at the door, and the boss went out to open the door, and I was temporarily rescued. After a while, the boss brought in a large bag of drinks and barbecued, and the fragrance suddenly spread throughout the bedroom. While they were relaxed, I quickly climbed into bed. The classmate said that a handsome guy, named Gerald Bruno had trouble sending it to her. YO tilde WHATS the situation. This is tilde. Everyone put the table in the middle, carried stools and sat around to eat, and said as they ate, "Sixth, don't force us to go to your bed. Be honest." I was covered in the quilt, my eyes closed, and I was open, anyway. I did everything that should be done, and what should not be done. Everyone coaxed, and all the bad nature broke out, and the car was directly driven onto the highway. My face in the quilt was so red from what they said that I didn't dare to show my face. A group of old perverts. I touched the ring on my hand and smiled. Gerald Bruno proposed to me last night, and he said that both families knew about it, and that I was the last one to know, which was excessive. He said that we would get married when we returned from winter vacation. No wonder my mom said that I would have a good coming of age ceremony during the winter break, which was not at all like what my mom would do. Since that night, Gerald Bruno and I have been sticking together whenever we have time. As for Ruth Juliet, Gerald Bruno said he had fired her from the company. I pretended to say, "What are you doing? What are you doing to fire her?" Gerald Bruno glanced at me lightly, but he explained, "Didn't you always talk about marrying a domineering president, when you grew up? When I started the company, I didn't fulfill your dream of being the president's wife. My president's wife was wronged and can't get it back. I cover my face. Who doesn't have a secondary school period? However, Gerald Bruno is so good. I like him more." What to do? During the winter vacation, as soon as I got home, my mother said to me, "The girl is not staying. Look at the pigs I have raised for 18 years, and I have arched the cabbage so quickly." I had a black line on my face. "Mom, am I my own child?" Gerald Bruno and I have long been known to the two families, so I was officially engaged to Gerald Bruno. The two families went on a trip as usual, but unlike usual, Gerald Bruno and I were able to get away with it. The two mothers sat together chattering, and my mother said, "It's good that we had a boy and a girl, otherwise I'm afraid we would have doubted life." Mrs. Bruno, actually, I still prefer two boys, and every time I go out on the street, I see two boys holding hands, not to mention how excited I am. I pass by with juice in my hand, and the corners of my mouth twitched when I heard this. "Awesome or Mrs. Bruno awesome? Admire Mr. Bruno." Mrs. Bruno kept talking about the two girls. I was listening to it with relish, and Gerald Bruno pulled me away with a black face. Mrs. Bruno said, "Sure enough, it's the sweetest of the little two childhood sweethearts." The two looked at each other and smiled as they fed each other. Mrs. Bruno said proudly, "Look, I have brainwashed my little rabbit cub since I was a child, and Hazel Terry will be his future wife in the future, so he must take good care of Hazel Terry, and not let other boys snatch it away." My mom was unconvinced and said, "Hey, I haven't been talking to my Hazel Terry family since I was a child, and I'm just going to find Gerald Bruno if I have something to do. Just play with him alone. Just my Hazel Terry is so well behaved and cute. Maybe how many people chase him." The two of them quarreled, and every word you said and I said that I had the greatest credit in the relationship between the two. The two mothers are powerful assists. Gerald Bruno, please be aware of the occasion, I said, covering my flushed face. He smiled, his lips pressed up again, much lighter than before, like a feather, and he hugged me in a very soft voice, repeating the words, "Hazel Terry, I like you very much." I smiled and responded, "Well, I like you too, I like it very much." until the end of my life. I can't stop me from liking you. Fanwhy, get the certificate. My relationship with Gerald Bruno grew over the past 4 years, and we moved out in our senior year. Gerald Bruno and I have been living together for a year now. After the graduation photo shoot, Gerald Bruno wanted to take me away, but I was detained by my roommate. Gerald Bruno could only wait anxiously, and he didn't dare to rush. After all, in the past 4 years, he has also learned about my roommates. Sixth, this way, hurry up, here we are. I walked briskly over. The boss put his arms around me and said, "How dare that one in your family have a stinky face? He doesn't want you to go, does he?" I smiled and said, "Gerald Bruno is in a hurry to take me to the Civil Affairs Bureau." "Whoa, is it so fast? When I get married, remember to come." "No problem." Gerald Bruno disappeared for a moment and then walked over with milk tea. The third child sighed softly. "This Gerald Bruno is doing this trick again. The boss is not made of steel. Whoever makes a traitor among us will not refuse to come." A traitor coughed weakly. And sure enough, Gerald Bruno directly handed the milk tea to the fourth child, and the fourth child took it with a smile. The crowd was very measured, and they took the time to let me go. Gerald Bruno took me to the Civil Affairs Bureau in a hurry. Today, there are a lot of people who come to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get their certificates, most of them young couples. In the graduation season, most of them go from campus to marriage. Gerald Bruno lined up and I rested. 4 years ago, Gerald Bruno was in line at the playground, and I was waiting for him in the shade. At that time, strange girls would come up to talk to me, and I could only watch from the sidelines, not daring to come forward. In the same scene, there will be no strange girls to talk to you now. Even if there were, I could stand in front of Gerald Bruno and say, "This is my husband, don't look at it." After waiting in line for a long time, it was finally time for us, and Gerald Bruno handed over the information. After a while, the young lady of the staff said to Gerald Bruno with a gentle and polite smile, "Sorry sir, you are not of legal age, and cannot apply for a marriage license." Gerald Bruno's face froze, and I laughed as I smiled. The couples in the back of the line laughed. I don't know who said, "Husband, don't you seem to be under 22 years old?" Everyone checked their accounts and breathed a sigh of relief. After their 22nd birthday, there were still a few months left, and suddenly sighed. Gerald Bruno left the Civil Affairs Bureau with me, with a stinky face. At dinner in the evening, I ignored Gerald Bruno's foul face and told me about it. Everyone ridiculed, especially the people in their dorm room laughed the most. After the oolong 4 years ago, Gerald Bruno's black history has been added to the story. Took his daughter-in-law to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get a certificate, but before the age was reached, he was kicked out in a gray way. On Gerald Bruno's birthday, he took me to squat at the door of the Civil Affairs Bureau early in the morning. I sighed deeply. The People's Political Affairs Bureau hasn't opened yet. Half an hour later, the young lady who received us before smiled and blessed us. I don't know where Gerald Bruno got the candy from, and the entire Civil Affairs Bureau gave it one by one. Gerald Bruno twitched his hand, took the red book from my hand, and put it in his pocket. The reputation is good. I am afraid that I will lose everything, or put it with him for insurance. Forget it, don't worry about him for the sake of the red book. I asked him, "When did you prepare the candy? And you bought so much." "It's been ready for a long time." He glanced at me as he spoke, and his tone was smug. "No way. Who made your husband rich?" I didn't give him a lot of face. "I see that you were driven away by the ashes last time, and you feel embarrassed, so you want to get back to the field." Gerald Bruno gritted his teeth and said, "Hazel Terry, don't talk about this. I'll just mention it. Slightly tilde." I opened his eyes and ran forward. After a few steps, Gerald Bruno grabbed my hand and interlocked his fingers with a single force. "Hazel Terry is getting bolder. See how I clean you up tonight." I accused him. "You know how to bully me," he whispered. Well, I'm only bullying you, Gerald Bruno. You're getting worse. Well, it's only bad for you. The flush slowly crept up my cheeks, and I covered my hot cheeks with one hand and held Gerald Bruno in the other. The end.